guys, welcome to Evangelist Students Online. So glad that you're joining us this week. But right off the bat, I want to make you aware of something that we have happening this Sunday. For the first time since this whole quarantine thing has started, we are going to be meeting together as a church, not in person, but in cars. We're going to be having a drive-in service at the Archie Football Stadium at 10:45 this Sunday. It'll be about a 30 to 45 minute service. Pastor Miguel will preach a message. We'll have a couple of songs, and we're really looking forward to this. And if you are interested in this, just have your family drive on out and come be a part of this service. 10:45 this Sunday. We'd love to see you there. And tonight, we are in our stories series, and I want to start off with something. There's something that's been happening around in our household. I love when I'm working around the house. I love to listen to podcasts. I like to listen to podcasts about football, about basketball, about all sorts of stuff. I just like to have a podcast in while I'm doing stuff. And Amanda, most of the time this isn't a problem, but sometimes Amanda starts to talk to me, and when she's talking to me, I can't hear her. And then she realizes that she's talking to somebody who cannot hear her, and it's frustrating sometimes for her. Have you ever been talking to somebody that you felt like couldn't hear you? Have you ever been talking to somebody that, like, man, I thought that you were listening to me and you weren't listening to me? I remember before we had like iPhones, calls used to drop when you were driving, and I'd be talking to a friend, and there's no like tone of like the call drop, like beep beep, like a iPhone has now. It just drops. And so there'd be times when I'd be talking to somebody and I'd talk on for about 3 or 4 minutes and then realize that my call had dropped sometime long ago. It's frustrating when you're talking to somebody and they can't hear you. And then the other opposite is true of that as well. You ever get frustrated when somebody is talking to you and you can't seem to hear them? Like, have you ever had this moment? I have this rule of 3. If somebody tells me something 3 times and I can't understand them or I can't hear what they're saying, I'll go, what was that? Can you say that again? I'll do it like 3 times. After that, I'm just going to laugh and nod my head and say, yeah. Or I'm just going to say, oh, okay, awesome. Because I don't want to embarrass them any further. I don't want to embarrass myself any further by asking them more than 3 times what they said. It's frustrating sometimes when you can't hear what someone is saying to you. And so tonight, the question I have is that, have you ever felt like you can't hear God? We talked about how it's frustrating when you can't hear other people, but have you ever felt like you can't hear God? Have you ever felt like you can't feel God? Have you ever felt like you can't feel His presence? Have you ever felt like God can't hear you? Kind of like when Amanda's trying to talk to me with a podcast in. Have you ever felt like God can't hear you? Tonight I want to explore one of the reasons that we may feel that way. I think that there are many reasons for that from time to time, but I want to explore one of the reasons why we may feel that way tonight. As I said before, we're in our story series, and the title of the message tonight is called Who is Number One? Who is Number One? And the person we're going to be talking about, the story we're going to be highlighting tonight is about a man named Samson. It's found in the Old Testament in Judges chapter 16. And Samson was one person that was a God's chosen person. He was like a protector of the nation of Israel. So we talk about Israel a lot. That was God's people in the Old Testament. And so Samson was one of their protectors. And most of the time, he was fighting against these people called the Philistines. And these were people that fought against the Israelites. And God actually blessed Samson with strength. And so he was very strong, and he could fight off a lot of men at once. And so the Bible talks about how there was one time where he took a lion by its mouth and ripped it in 2. It talks about how he killed a bunch of people with just the jawbone of a donkey. In another instance, it talks about how he takes the gates of a city, these giant, massive, heavy gates, and he rips them off and carries them away, kind of signifying that the city can't not be protected by him because he can just take whatever gate they have. And so his power was God's power. God was working in him. He's what was called a Nazirite. A Nazirite was somebody that was from birth dedicated to God. And a couple things about a Nazirite is, 1, they didn't drink, and 2, they never cut their hair. And so Samson had long flowing hair. He never cut his hair at all. And so in Judges 16, though, we have this story where he falls in love with this woman named Delilah. You may have heard of Samson and Delilah before. And he falls in love with this woman. He goes over to her house, and Samson's enemies notice this. The Philistines notice this, and they say to Delilah in verse 5, in chapter 16, verse 5, they say to her this: "Entice Samson to tell you what makes him so strong and how he can be overpowered and tied up securely. Then each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, Please tell me what makes you so strong and what it would take to tie you up securely. So you can see from these passages that the Philistines are desperate. They're trying anything that they can do to get rid of Samson. Samson is beating them all across the country, and they want to make sure, hey, how can we do this? And they think they found this weak spot in the form of Delilah. Samson replied, if I were tied up with 7 new bowstrings that have not yet been dried, I would become as weak as anyone else. So the Philistine rulers brought Delilah 7 new bowstrings, and she tied Samson up with them. She had hidden some men in one of the inner rooms of her house, and she cried out, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. But Samson snapped the bowstrings as a piece of string snaps when it is burned by a fire. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. So what happens is the Philistine rulers approach Delilah. She agrees. She says, Samson, tell me what the secret of your strength is. He tells her bowstrings, so she ties him up with those. And once she does, she yells for the men to come out. But Samson breaks the strings, and he's fine. They don't know why he is strong. And so we have this moment where, hey, if I'm Samson at this point, things are looking a little fishy. I mean, you're asking me about my strength. I told you what you thought was true, what I knew would be a lie, and yet these men come running out of your house. How can I trust you again? If I were Samson, I'm not going back to Delilah. But I'm not Samson. And he does go back. And in verse 10, it says this. It says, afterward, Delilah said to him, you've been making fun of me and telling me lies. Now please tell me how you can be tied up securely. So Samson this time tells her, well, brand new ropes. If you use brand new ropes that have never been used and you tie me up with those, that will make me weak. So she does that. The Philistines come out. He breaks the ropes. And again, she says this to him in verse 13. Then Delilah said, you've been making fun of me and telling me lies. Now tell me how you can be tied up securely. Samson replied, if you were to weave the 7 braids of my hair into the fabric of your loom and tighten it with the loom shuttle, I would become as weak as anyone else. So while he slept, Delilah wove the 7 braids of his hair into the fabric. Then she tightened the loom shuttle, and again she cried, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. But Samson broke free again. And at this point, I don't know what Samson is thinking, but he is still with Delilah. And Delilah is upset. And she says in verse 15, she says, then Delilah pouted, how can you tell me I love you when you don't share your secrets with me? You made fun of me 3 times now, and you still haven't told me what makes you strong. So in verse 17, it says this, finally, Samson shared his secret with her. My hair has never been cut, he confessed, for I was dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth, which we talked about. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as anyone else. Delilah realized he finally had told her the truth, so she sent for the Philistine rulers. Come back one more time, she said, for he has finally told me his secret. So the Philistine rulers returned with the money in their hands. Delilah lulled Samson to sleep with his head in her lap, and then she called in a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. In this way she began to bring him down, and his strength left him. Then she cried out, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. When he woke up, he thought, I will do as before and shake myself free. But he didn't realize the Lord had left him. So the Philistines captured him and gouged out his eyes. They took him to Gaza, where he was bound with bronze chains, and forced him to grind grain in the prison. So Samson finally tells Delilah the truth, and his strength leaves him, and he's captured by the Philistines. And the status verse, I think, is the one that we read in verse 20. It says this, when he woke up, I thought, I will do as before and shake myself free. But he didn't realize that the Lord had left him. Samson chose Delilah over the Lord. And this has kind of been, if you read his story, this has kind of been something that's been going on. He'd always struggled with making God number one in his life. But at this moment, he chose to tell Delilah his secret. He chose Delilah over the vow that he had made to God. Over this lifelong endeavor, he chose Delilah. This woman that 3 times already had tried to get him captured, he chose to trust her over God. So here's where I want to land with us tonight. Sometimes when we wonder, God, why can't I hear you? God, why can't I feel you? That answer sometimes is complicated. Sometimes it has to do with God's will. Maybe it's not what God has planned for your life. Maybe sometimes that has to do with God's timing. Maybe you want something and the time just isn't right for it. Maybe sometimes that has to do with God's plan. Like I can't hear God and maybe he's preparing you for something that you can't see coming yet or you can't know yet, because if you do know, you're going to mess it up. Or maybe God is trying to teach you something in his silence. Sometimes that answer is complicated when we ask, why can't I feel God? Why can't I hear God? Why doesn't it seem like God is hearing me? But sometimes that answer is not as complicated. Sometimes that answer is simple. We can't hear God, we can't feel God, because we have simply chosen something other than God and placed it as Lord over our lives instead of Him. Instead of placing God number one in our lives, we choose something else. For Samson, that was Delilah. Samson chose, Delilah is more important to me than what God has for me. For you and I, that can be a number of things. I'm not going to guess what it could be in your life. In my life, I have things that if I'm not careful can slip above the place that God has in our life. God should be number one in our lives. And sometimes when you and I can't hear Him, sometimes when you and I can't feel Him, that answer isn't complicated. It's not, well, maybe it's His will, maybe it's His timing, maybe it's His plan, whatever. Sometimes that answer is as simple as we have chosen to put other things above Him in our life. So the question that I have for you tonight is this: what is above God in your life? What is above God in your life? For some of us, that's going to be many things. For some of us, that's going to be everything. And for some of us, it's just going to be a couple of things. But what is above God in your life? And then the challenge is simple and yet difficult. I want you to do whatever it takes to make God number one in your life. Do whatever it takes to make God number one in your life. And here's the encouragement I will give for you with that. You are never too far to place God number one in your life. You're never too far to put God first. Here's my favorite part of Samson's story. It's in verses 21 through 22. And it says this. We already read 21. I want to read you 22 as well. It says, "So the Philistines captured him and gouged out his eyes. They took him to Gaza, where he was bound with bronze chains and forced to grind grain in the prison." But here's verse 22. "But before long, his hair began to grow back." I love verse 22. But before long, his hair began to grow back. What a great verse. If you don't know the rest of his story, he's grinding grain in the prison, but as he's doing that, his hair is growing back, and one night he finds himself in the middle of a party of thousands of Philistines, kind of like a party trick for them, and he says to God, "God, please give me my strength one last time," and he pushes apart two pillars, the walls come down, and kills all of these Philistines. In fact, the Bible tells us that he defeated more enemies of Israel in that one night than he had his entire life. It was an amazing moment for him. He decided in that moment, I'm going to put God first once again. So for you and I, my challenge for you, I already said it, my challenge for you is this: do whatever it takes to put God first. What I don't want to see for your life is I don't want to see you have to go through the pain that Samson went through. I don't want to see you have to go through your own Delilah and have, maybe you won't have your eyes gouged out. You're probably not going to have your eyes gouged out. You're probably not going to find yourself in a prison, but you can go through some pretty painful things. And what I want for you is I want the best for you. God has the best for you. And I encourage you, I challenge you to right now, while you're still young, right now, while you still have all your life ahead of you, choose to make God number one. And if you do, it will change your life forever. Let's pray. Father, thank you for tonight. Thank you for these young men and women. Lord, I pray that you would give us the courage and the boldness to put you first. God, I pray that right now, even as I'm speaking, that you would help these students to identify what is it they've placed above you in their lives. What do they need to change? What do they need to remove? And God, I pray that we would take those things away and put you first. God, I love you. I surrender everything to you. Thank you for each and every person listening right now. Help us to put you first always, every day. In your name I pray. Amen. Amen. Well, hey, love you guys so much. Can't wait to see you. Make sure to share this video, especially if you have friends that you know that this would help. Share this video with them. Invite them to like us on or follow us on Instagram. We'd love for all of that to happen. And I want to remind you again about this Sunday, 10:45 at the Archie Football Stadium. Make sure to be in a car, and we'd love to see you there. Also, with the state of Missouri opening up soon, it looks like some things might be starting to open up. I want to let you know that we're going to keep you updated on when we can start meeting together again. We hope it's sooner rather than later, but we're going to do it smart. We're going to do it in ways that we know won't endanger you, but at the same time, make sure that we can see each other face to face again. So as I know, you will know. Love you guys. See you next week.